what are we doing today? Well, you've probably read the title and got some idea already. Well, I'm going to make some cast material again. Now, this was my learning piece, the last bit of brass that I cast. And this was given to my wife for her birthday / Mother's Day. They're very close together. Yes, I'm kind of cheating, but it took me about 8 months of practice and experimentation and purchases to get to this point. And this is made out of 38 special brass. But because Mother's Day is tomorrow, I've been planning on making a special piece for my mother for quite some time. And I've come up with an idea. So let's grab a piece out of the museum off to the side here, which is on the messy end of my desk and in the way of a water bottle. We can peel off this little magnetic cover. You'll notice there's this little piece here. In between these two things is a little tiny tube, and that's made from tritium gas. If I turn the lights off, you can see why that's going to be useful. We'll turn all these illumination lights off, and if we cut my hand around this, you can see it glows. Now that has radioactive tritium gas in it, and it turn all this back on, and it will glow for around about 15 years. Or thereabouts to some degree until that gas degrades. So I'm planning to make this piece of jewellery with a replaceable receptacle for this. So you can add some solvent to get it out and put a new one in. But yeah, so the other thing is this is going to be a bit of a memorial thing. When my late brother left us, he was working with brass quite a bit. And making brass pens and all sorts of things. This isn't one of his, but this is a bit of a similar kind of thing to what he'd been doing. I do have an example of his somewhere, which we'll find later in the video. But I plan on using the brass scraps and offcuts that I collected from his workshop before we were forced to dismantle that. So I'm going to be melting that down and casting it into a medallion. And I think I've got an idea on how we're going to do it. And it might be a medallion, or it might end up being a pendant. I'm not quite sure yet, but I've been working with my wife to come up with some ideas, and this is the one that we decided on. So I think at this point I need to just jump into AutoCAD, and I'll get some screen capture software out, and you can see the design process from there. And I'm going to cheat and use some of the pre-existing molding techniques that I've already got. This will be a fairly basic design, but I'm going to work with what I know so I can get a good polished end result. So let's jump into AutoCAD. So that's the AutoCAD stuff done. So now the emotional bit begins. I need to find the source of the brass. Now, while I do have a big pile of leftover brass from the last casting, we're not going to use any of that. This one's going to be an emotional one and a sentimental one. So we're going to be using what's in this box. So let's move our camera here. Use some of the stuff that's in this box here. Now my brother had a falling block 4570, was his favourite, and I have 4570 brass that he personally hand loaded and fired from that, and there is a few of those in here. I'm going to find as many of those as I have, and I'll save a few left, but they're Hornady rounds. There's also some good memorable ones in here. We can usually pick the 303 British if we're careful. This is a Mosin Nagant round. I'm pretty sure that's a copper washed steel. I'll check with a magnet in a minute. They were for my rifle that I hand loaded, so if they're brass, we'll melt a few of them down as well. And we'll just get this, because if you don't already know, my brother is no longer with us. He took his own life some years ago. Yeah, there's a whole documentary on that. I'll go into it later. He did have a 303, and this is all brass that came out of his collection, and most of these are ones he's fired. So I'm going to hand pick enough out of this to cast this pendant. So it's going to be a bit of a job picking through all of this. I think there's also some that he fired in here which were, here we go, this is MG. I think that is a 303 British, produced during wartime, 1945, just after. And MH, I think, is Hendon factory in Australia. This is MG, I think that's an American one. But he did have some 303 British he fired. But these are sentimental in nature and also historical in nature. So I'm going to see how much 4570 I can dig out of here. I think there's a bit of a gold mine at the bottom, and there's all these cases and stuff that he's cut up as well for them. So we'll pack out all the stuff that is not in pristine condition, and we'll squash it and melt it and turn it into a piece of jewellery. We have a selection of brass that were picked out, and it's now half of it's on the floor. So because there is probably some heritage, I guess, to these things, we want to explain that. So this one here, this 4570, I'm going to have to pop that primer. Still got a live one in there. Although my brother, in making pens and stuff, he would often put dummy primers in. Either case, I'm still going to hit that one. Now, he had an Australian-made falling block 4570 that he was very proud of, and it was worth quite a bit of money. And these are the Hornady 4570 rounds that he used in it. And these are probably the last of the ones that I have from that, so I'll be keeping some of them aside. We have all the tips off the, I think these are 22 Hornet rounds. He's got tips off them that he cut off making pens, so I've got a bunch of them in here as well. I've got a couple. This is, I need to get a magnet to check this. This is from my old Mosin Nagant that I gave all my off-spent rounds to him, and that's a 762 by 54 Russian. So that one I need to check if it's steel. If it is, it's not going in the furnace. And he had a 303 British rifle. That's where a lot of this comes from. And he did fire some post-World War II stuff. Like this is 1945. The head stamp of MG, I think, means it came from the USA. MF, I think, is Hendon in South Australia. And that's usually post-1944. And we have a few other things here. This is a 3030 Winchester, and I think he's cut that one down, maybe not. But yes, he had a 3030 Winchester as well. And there's a few others. This looks like a crimp from a Norma branded 4570. So all this stuff is stuff that my brother's had his hands on. So this should be about enough to cast a pendant and have a little bit of sprue on the top. Now, the hard bit is coming soon. I'm going to have to take a hammer to these and squash them all down. That's going to be emotionally difficult, but if I want it to cast properly, it's one of the things I've got to do. So I'm going to do that bit off. So obviously I decided to time-lapse that little process. Now, the next thing I've got to do is I have a 4570 with a live primer to deal with. I'm going to take a very low-tech method. I'm going to take a Phillips head screwdriver bit and smack it on the base with a hammer. And I'll be doing that inside the vise. And of course I've cleared some area below so that if there is anything in there, it doesn't hit me in the foot. Although I can quite clearly see down there that there's no powder, no nothing in there. So let's do that, and then we'll go and figure out how much brass we have. So primer done. Let's have a look in here. I've packed in most of the flattest ones we have down here so far. That's about halfway up the crucible. That should be enough, but I'm going to need a bit more to make up the bulk on the top, and this will melt down as these things start to liquefy at the bottom. But crucially, I need some nice little flat bits at the bottom first to get a molten pool going so that it more efficiently melts all the rest of this. Master cut. So this is in several pieces, so let me explain how this works if you haven't seen my other casting videos. So these pieces are going to get glued on here, and they will provide a bigger cavity so that I have some hydraulic pressure casting stuff in. I have my mold master, which is a little bit burnt but will still do for the job. Now what's going to happen here, this bit is going to go on the back, which being that side. That's important because of the way the laser cuts. There is a slight taper, and doing it this way means the sand will most likely come out. So we're going to flip this over. I'm going to glue this piece on the back here to give it some thickness and so that that recess works. And then once that's glued, I'm going to shave this down a bit to reduce its thickness slightly, although I still do want a little bit of weight in this because sentimental stuff often has a little bit of a weight. I might even glue these bits on the back just to help. So we'll do it backwards. No, wait, I can't do that. I've just had a thought. I can't do that because of the way I'm casting it. I'll do some thinking and we'll get this assembled and we'll be right back. Okay, so I think I've come up with a solution. Now normally I would stagger these off to one side, but I've staggered them off top and bottom. That's okay. Now this means that when it's in the mold, all this stuff can be at the back. I found the pouring sprues, or the vent sprue off, I've got to learn my molding terminology. Anyway, I found this piece off a previous mold that I've been able to glue to the back of these to double the thickness, which means when I pack it in, all this should be on the surface, making the removal a little easier. It's time to pack some sand in. This time I'm doing this on the workshop floor because I've had troubles getting the sand compacted well enough. So let's get a bit of talc on the job here. Just put a whole heap on here and then we'll shake off the excess. Now, this is where the moment where we discover whether or not we've had a failure, or at least one of several points. So we need to be able to get this out. The experts tell me to give it a little tap before I try and lift it. You want to pick that bit out there. So I think that's holding it in. Alright. We are going to have trouble by the looks of this. Alright, I don't want to be distracted by the camera, so we're going to turn this off, rip it out and see if I mess everything up. Alright, so one of the biggest problems I've got with this type or with this grade of sand is the fine details like this are nearly impossible. There's no way in hell I'm going to get that to come out like that. It's just not going to happen. On top of that, I wasn't quite zealous enough with the baby powder. I needed a lot more. So yeah, at least I haven't destroyed the master, but yeah, this is going to be a challenge to get this to work. So yeah, I'm going to have to do some thinking. I might shove some of that really fine clay up in that hole and see what happens. But yeah, I think I'm going to watch some YouTube tutorials and see what happens. So the end result here isn't great, but I think this might work. And I do have a depression in the middle for the tube. I'm just going to manually clean out some of my vents. I have two for redundancy in case one blocks. This will create quite a rough product, but certainly close enough to the right shape that I can machine that. So we're going to go with it. The problem has been all along the little piece in the middle here, this bit here. I packed a little bit of talc and then a little bit of bentonite clay in there, and I think I've got a groove enough that I can work with. At the very least, I can sort of machine that out. It doesn't need to be very deep. I'm going to try this. I'm going to have a test run. I was going to wait for Tinkerman Mick to come around and witness the attempt, but I'm going to just go for it here, and we'll cast another one if we need to. Alright, so let's just get that off out of the way. The sprues will look a bit rough, but I don't give a crap what that looks like. I'm interested in this metal bit. So before I mess this up and cause some damage to it, let's get this in the vise. Right, so my mold is in a really tenuous position right now, so I'm just going to go for it. And one of my backing block trays has fallen apart, so at this point I'm going to let the angry groaning happen, and I think I'm going to pour straight into this without the blue tack around here this time. Normally that's what I would do, but I think at this point I risk upsetting the mold and everything like that. So I think if I'm going to get anything remotely usable out of this, I'm going to have a go at this. And I don't have too much more of this brass left to work with, so I need to be careful. This will be definitely a one-off. So I'm going to let all this warm up and we'll be back. Alright, so our furnace is just creeping up to around about 900 degrees. I'm going to start getting the camera and all my safety gear prepared and see if there's room for any more brass in there. And any excess is going to get dropped into a pot full of water and for use later on. Alright, this is a flimsy looking mould. I hope it holds together and I hope I don't get burnt. But we're going to have a crack at it and see what we can do. Now we've just hit 1100 degrees here, or 1098. I'm just going to let it go for a little bit longer. And actually, you know what, we might just pour now. I think we'll be right. So here goes nothing. And I'll try and get clear of these fumes. There's probably a lot of zinc and possibly a bit of lead in there. We don't know. Let's get this happening. Alright. Here goes. Alright, excess brass. Alright. I'll go in here. Alright, now worryingly, I haven't seen any brass come back up out of the venting sprues. That worries me a little bit. Let's just moisten this a little bit. Let that cool off a little bit. So that says maybe my mold is blocked up. I might have to try again, but there's also a fair gap, so maybe it's spread off into the other areas of the mold. We'll find out when we demold it. So just as I've finished the cast, it started raining. Very appropriate. Right, so this next bit I'm going to do on the GoPro, just because that was the easiest one to handle, and I also don't want to damage my good camera. Now this is likely to fall to pieces massively and quickly and in a really messy fashion, so let's see. Alright, well, it has filled the mould fully. Let's have a quick look over the top here. It has poured all the way through the mould. That's a good sign. And I can smell talc, hot talc, which is a weird smell. Let's give this a bit of a tap. It's still very hot at this stage. And I've switched gloves, so I've got to be careful of that finger. What am I worried about? Messing the sand mould up. Right, let's flip this over. Oh, 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 oh. I think we might have got that indentation where we wanted it. I dare not touch this with a toothbrush right now. I do have a little set of mini wire brushes somewhere. We'll find that. We'll find that, and we'll be back in a moment. All right. Well, I found a wire brush. Careful of that middle finger. Oh, I think it did, and it's nicely scented, and that hurt my fingers. It's still very hot. So, how am I going to tackle this? I think I'm going to grab a pair of pliers. I'm going to pick this up like so, and we're going to give you a close-up look. Spin around, and it's going in the water. That's going to cool off for a little bit. We have our excess brass sitting here too. I'm going to have to dry that out before we put it back in the crucible, which whilst that's cooling, we'll show you an issue. This furnace doesn't cool down immediately. It's still quite glowing, quite red hot in there. So I'm thinking I might put those other shells in there whilst it's still hot. Although I seem to recall somebody telling me that's probably a stupid idea. So easy enough to hold off. We've still got a few extra shells we didn't need. We'll do them in the next cast. I dare say I'm probably going to have to make another one of these for my sister-in-law. So yeah, we might do that. Anyway, let's let this cool off, and we'll be... So it's been a little bit of a clean up on the belt sander, but we're starting to get there. There's still a few imperfections in this, but I might leave some of them in for character, and also out of a bit of laziness. But yeah, we probably do need to start on the second stage of sanding on this. That's going to take a while. So I think I'm going to go have something to eat first. I'm getting a bit shaky in the legs now, so yeah, we'll come back and finish this off shortly. Had a feed. It's time to get back to it. Now, before I put a good high sheen and polish and everything on this, I'm going to drill a hole, especially while it's nice and grippy and unpolished. So I've got some circuit board drills here that work well for it, and I've got a hand drill. Now, I don't think I'm going to get all the way through with a hand drill, but what I am going to do is get a good start on it and get my position correct. And I've busted this carrier quite some time ago. I'm going to go with a drill bit that's about a medium size. So this one I think is about a 0.5 mil drill bit. I think I've got a 1 and a 0.8 in there as well. I'll start with this guy to do a pilot hole. I'm pretty sure it's one of the sharper ones, and then we'll go from there. I need to change my collets here to accommodate that bit. My hands are a little bit slippery at this point. And we'll get that on. Alright, now the other trick I'm going to use is a bit of blue tack. This is funny coloured blue tack. This used to be multicoloured stuff that my apprentice all mushed together. I buy her a pack of the multicoloured stuff every now and then. Now I need to decide where to drill this hole. I think about there is probably going to be about the most sensible place to put it, given the diameter of the spring steel I want to put through there. So I'm putting a fair bit of downforce on it and just getting things started here. Normally we'd do that with like an automatic center punch or something, but Alright, we've got a good little divot there, we can work with that. Now I'll get the drill on the job. In an ideal world I would be using a drill press for this, and I do have a drill press, but it's not exactly what you would call gentle. So this I've got a lot more control over it. This is my good priority. I can just sit here quietly and chew away at it at a low speed. So we'll be back. So the hole is done and we drilled through into the bench. But for this purpose I don't mind drilling a hole in the bench. The bench tops for this are about 15 or 20 bucks. It's just a standard size sheet of melamine. But we have our hole is all the way through, not exactly straight, which is one of the drawbacks of not using a drill press. But it will do to hold it on, and this is designed to be more of a memento than something perfectly, I don't know, perfect. So I've had a bit of a scrounge through my paper collection, make a bit of a glove. So I've found, where are we? I've given this a bit more of a sand, by the way. I have found 500 grit paper to start with, and we'll be moving up to 800, then 1000. Got a brand spanking new sheet of 1200, which is normally where I'd finish, but I've got a bit of used 1500 here, which I've used on acrylic, but I'll give that a bit of a wash. It's all wet and dry paper, so we're going to be here for quite some time. So I wonder how I'm going to go with time lapse. We'll try it anyway and see what happens. It was buffing nicely and looking perfect, and then it snagged on the wheel and it flung into the buffering foam I've got there, and that's the last I know of its whereabouts. I dare say when I find it there might be a dent in it that I'm going to have to polish out again, so I've got to do some looking and see if I can work out where it went. Alright, so I found it. I have it in my hand. It had bounced off, bounced all the way up, and the ding I heard was it landing on the back of the pedestal here. Luckily no major dents in it, so we're going to finish the polish and hopefully we'll be out of here. While things are still a little bit warm, I'm going to give this a good polish up just in a workshop rag, aka an old towel, which I think probably came from my mother's place in the first place. So yeah, let's see if we can get all this, just all the buffing compound polished off. I'll give it a good clean up with contact cleaner once we get inside, but this should be very shiny and flashy looking now. Well, there's a bit of blue tack still stuck on there, we can't have that. Alright, here we go, and I've got a fingerprint on it already, but hopefully my camera can focus here, and it's nice and shiny now. Let's wipe that fingerprint off. So, we're back at the workshop, or back on the workbench, inside rather, we're out of the workshop, and I have some nice clean workshop rags. I think I've just about got it polished. So I'm going to take some circuit board cleaner here and try and clean all that stuff out of that hole and give it a good proper clean up. I think a toothbrush is in order. We'll get this nice and polished and then we'll put that tube in. Oh, the neighbours are flying up and down the street in first gear again. But now for the delicate bit, we have over here my tritium tube. Now I haven't stopped to check to see if this actually fits or not, and I'm using my plastic tweezers here because I don't want to damage the tube. These are very, very thin glass, so see, is it going to drop in here nicely? I think it's going to sit in there just perfectly. Alright, so now how to do this. I had planned to put this in and then add glue. I'm thinking I'm going to add the glue, then put the tube in, because then I shouldn't get it all over the rest of the unit. I need to clean all the crap off the top of the tube at the moment, so I don't get it where I don't want it. Point of no return, guys. You don't come back from this. Right. There's one drop in there. I'll let it get a bit of moisture into the air for a moment. See if we can drop you in here. Alright. Now hopefully what that does is that creates a bit of an optic path, a bit like a light tube, to the reflective brass behind it. And that should mean that it should stand out a little bit more at night. It also means by using acrylic super glue in the 10 or 15 years or so when this stops glowing, if these things are still able to be found, it's possible that you can stick another tube in just with a drop of acetone. Right, I have my box of rando springs and it's time to pick one, and I need to take my glasses off. I'm a little too close, and I need to take my sunnies off my neck here. So we want a closed coiled spring that is of a suitably large diameter. This one might do the job. I have some bigger, heavier ones, but I don't think they're really wise to put on there. Alright, so take a pair of needle nose here. I'm going to try and rotate this spring around just enough that it doesn't have a jagged bit hanging out the side, which means we've got to wind this into the jaws a little bit. Somewhere about there I would hope would be right. There's our little ring there that I keep dropping. It's getting to the end of the night where I should call it quits. So there is our hanging loop. We can probably always fit something better than that at a later date. I am going to get this started by shoving tweezers into the weave here. And then once the tweezers are in, I can get the needle nose pliers in. And that gets me, whoop, don't want to do that. That gets me enough leverage in here to poke it through, hopefully without scratching the crap out of everything. So let's start on the back. And be careful of the super glue that is still wet that I just spread everywhere. Really should have waited for that to dry. Alright, so our loop is in. And this is about 6mm thick, so this could be a challenge to get it through. We'll be back in a minute once that's in. A spring loop in, but because I've touched the wet super glue, I now have to do some crisis control, which means opening another new thing, which is a new type of acetone here. I'm going to give it a quick wipe over with a bit of acetone on a rag. Hopefully I don't tip the whole container over while I do this. Let's give it a bit of a clean up that way. I don't want to pull the tube out. Just want to give it a scrub on the edge here. Put the acetone away. Now I'll let this dry properly, but I'll give you a quick look at how it is. Presently we have a ring on the top here, a tube in there, and nice and shiny. So what we'll do, I'll pack all this up and we'll turn the lights off and look at it glow. Alright, so this is it glowing in the dark. The exposure is going to be a bit horrible at the moment, but yeah, this should continue glowing like this for years to come. Without the requirement for sun to recharge it, it'll continue to glow all night, which means it won't fade during the night. It'll continue at the same intensity constantly. So yeah, I think we're about done. Let's turn some lights back on. Alright, so that's the end of this project. We're going to go and hand this one over. Now, normally I would do the reaction video and all that sort of stuff, but this one's very personal. Pretty sure my mother's going to cry when I tell her how I made it. So yeah, I think we'll keep this one off camera. But yeah, I'm going to enjoy the shininess of this just for a few minutes first. Now I elected to leave some of the blemishes in the side here, a bit representative of the flaws and the scars and all the rest that my brother and I both left and have had. Too many pronouns to use. But anyway, we're going to hand it over. So I hope you enjoyed this. By all means, let me know what you think. I can't add any more to this. I'm very tired and I'm exhausted. So I'm going to call it quits on the video, and I'll see you next time.